here we are at 5 to 4. Everybody's back. That's great. And on the governance theme, we'll hear from Toronto first. Is Toronto ready? Toronto's thumbs up. Yes. Well, take it away, Toronto. You have 10 minutes.
All right. Thanks, everyone. So I'll be talking about our experience today. I guess I should put this into full screen. You guys see my screen okay?
Yes, we do.
Okay, great. So for today, we actually ended up visiting Evergreen Brickworks, which is situated on the south part of the Don River here in Toronto, and got a chance to talk with a lot of people about the governance of their green space and the canopy there at Evergreen. So a bit about Evergreen Brickworks. Like I said, it's situated on the Don River, and it was a historic site for brick production here in Toronto and the region around, due to its deep clay deposits near the river. And you can see there on the left sort of what the site looked like historically prior to its revitalization during the 20th century. But pretty much through the 1800s, clay materials were excavated and this large quarry was produced. And this is pretty descriptive of the Don River and the sort of developments and development and industry that was happening along the Don River. The description of this type of effluents and other byproducts that were being dumped into the river is not pretty, but essentially the Don River for quite a long time was quite polluted, thanks to industries like these brickworks and other things like that. Eventually, this quarry and the brick productions were no longer quite as profitable, and it was eventually sold. And initially it was intended to be sold to the Toronto and Region Conservation Authority, but we were told that they didn't have their act together at the time. And instead it was sold to a developer who attempted to essentially build a condo, which was descriptive of the time. And this is where we sort of get into the kind of government governance and community engagement to sort of have a say in the type of development that occurs in their areas. And community groups quickly came in and actually pretty much caused a stop to that development through their activism and essentially not wanting this development to occur in their area. And thanks to that developer actually turned around in the following years and attempted to sell it back, and was actually sold it to the TRCA for quite a bit higher than they actually purchased it. Following this, the land was eventually revitalized into something similar to what you see there on the right, through many partnerships that we'll talk about shortly. But as far as its current standing, it's currently being leased by an organization called Evergreen, who were a former group of which is a former tree planting organization. And then they initially described what they wanted to use the land for as part of their tree nursery operations. But when purchasing of the land and brought this idea to the city, who currently manage the lands for the TRCA, they were asked to think a little bit more broadly and think about the overall additional landscape beyond just the buildings where they could produce their tree nurseries. And so it's currently being leased and managed in conjunction between the City of Toronto and Evergreens. And so currently has its name, Evergreen Brickworks. And so I was kind of a little messily describing all of the different people who are involved with Evergreen Brickworks, but here's a kind of more comprehensive list. So there's the actual organization of Evergreen, the City of Toronto, who does the management, the actual property owners, who are the Toronto and Region Conservation Authority, local organizations such as various public volunteer groups and programs, universities and colleges, and then the list goes on with various interests in the attempts to both revitalize, manage, and engage the community here in this area. And it was quickly described to us that these works and the types of revitalizations couldn't be possible without consistent partnerships and discussions and collaboration. And here in this case, with the City of Toronto and the TRCA being largely involved with the setting of the goals for the area, which included, like I mentioned, revitalization and increasing the canopy cover, as well as the removal of invasive species and the setting up of potential education opportunities through local partners. They also provided a lot of the funding that goes into the various citizen groups and community organizations, as well as incorporating different research groups to help them with the various problems that they have. And the example that was given was in the managing of, it's escaping my memory right now, but I will come back to it once I do remember. But
I believe it was Phragmites, I think was the,
thank you.
yeah.
Yeah, we have so much of that, you'd think I wouldn't forget. But essentially, Brickworks is a great example of how these partnerships work and what they described as how to prioritize the various strengths of these different organizations. And as is described by pretty much everybody throughout the various days, not just today, but previous, it's collaborative restoration projects that seem to work the best. They also describe several challenges and next steps that are going to be needed. So here in this case, they really specified and stressed the importance of engaging people meaningfully and providing them with opportunities to participate in a diversity of different programs, but also ones that were, like I said, meaningful. So in the case of the Phragmites, they gave the example of, inviting volunteers who would be here for the long term, essentially, not bringing people in to say, take one day at removing some Phragmites and then that Phragmites being returned to the site immediately after these volunteers left. So kind of these long-term projects that saw real benefit to the site. In addition, a consistent point that was often brought up is the lack of resources that these departments and organizations often face. And so people power and actual monetary resources seem to be the common stressor across all of these programs. And there seems to be a sort of cyclical process that was described where the on-the-ground communities or the on-the-ground organizations work with communities who then learn about the issues that are involved, go to their politicians. The politicians then learn from their constituents about the issues and then work towards gaining funding for those organizations. And then the cycle kind of goes on as new issues pop up and the community is then engaged again. And so the communication side of things was heavily stressed. And the example again that was given was the sort of how to correctly and informatively inform their community and other organizations about the work that is being done on the ground. And they gave the example of a sort of fake news article about the work that's being done in the ravines and how the ravines were essentially had very little ecological value due to a variety of reasons, like invasive species or just a lack of multifunctionality and so on. And they think that they could improve the way that they're describing the projects that they're working on and the benefits that they're seeing in the ravines by really focusing on the communication components of the work they do. They also describe several projects like along the Don River. I'm forgetting some of their names, but the one very long named one there is the Don River and Central Waterfront and Connected Project, which they said could be named better, and is one of the most expensive revitalization projects that are happening on the Don River. I forget the exact value number, but very expensive is the gist of it. And just to kind of wrap up, we were given a final tour of their Indigenous edible gardens that are currently on the site that have recently sort of been brought to Evergreen thanks to the work of one through Evergreens and also the work of one Isaac Crosby, pictured there on the right. And he was great and very gracious to show us the various work that he's done, from bringing Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous farming practices to the site, as well as incorporating that Indigenous culture in the practices and the Indigenous history of the site as well, which is something that he actually indicated he would like to work on, because currently they do not talk too much about the Indigenous history there at Evergreen and the brickwork site. And lastly, they mentioned the various programs that they have around educating youth on Indigenous cultures and practices. I'm going to try my best to pronounce this, but Nikibi Dewadina Gigwe was the name of the current youth program, where they invite youth to participate in the growing and learning and experiencing of the practices and cultures and techniques involved with sort of that sustainable and Indigenous knowledge that Isaac and other community elders have to share. And it was really great to see and hear some of the stories and practices that they have. So I think that's the last slides. So happy to, 3 billion is what Kit mentioned was for that previous project, but we're happy to have any questions.
Thanks, Menelik. Does anyone have a question for Menelik and the Toronto people?
I wonder if you have a conception of when the Indigenous group was brought into the fold and what kind of role it might have had in early decision-making on how the site would be developed into Evergreen Brickworks. Was that discussed?
Not specifically when it came to the restoration, and anyone from the group can, if they had like side conversations, can correct me or add, but Isaac himself is, I believe, a relatively new addition to Evergreen. Whether or not they communicated with Indigenous organizations or consultants in the various restoration projects, that wasn't clarified to me. And if I had the chance to go back in time, I would probably ask that question to them. But yeah.
I think the restoration was primarily led by a group of extremely wealthy benefactors who saw this plot of land and decided it would be nice to restore it. So I think that was the main thrust of the decision.
Yeah, so I'm to answer your question, I'm guessing no. I'm guessing they should have, but I'm guessing they didn't, because it seemed to have started from a lot of private funding of wealthy residents in the area who didn't want to see who wanted to see the ravine get revitalized since they lived so close by, and a lot of local activists, and a lot of faculty and students at U of T. But yeah, I think this program was pretty recent. I think it was in 2018. So it's more of a program for Indigenous youth. And I think they did that in collaboration with Daniel School of Architecture. But yeah, it's only been around for about 3 years, I think.
I guess the final thing to add would be that Isaac did indicate that there pretty much was little to no Indigenous involvement at the site prior to his joining, and that was partially because of the lack of mention in by the previous organizations of Indigenous practices or history at the site, and so they apparently generally avoided the brickwork site.
I would just add, and it's maybe of interest because we're an NSERC Create network, that you're right, Isaac, from what I understand too, is Isaac was with the NGO there, Evergreen, before the Indigenous piece that was brought in that's there now in terms of tree planting. So it's not just the Indigenous medicine garden, but it's these tree plants and learning from elders the values or how the Indigenous community valued these trees. And that was brought in by my colleague from landscape architecture, the tree plant, along with the city of Toronto, because the city provided, I think it was $100,000 of matching funding. And the relationship here is they went for an NSERC promo science and they got funded. I think it was 200 and some thousand. It's a 3-year program. So just to let people know, it's kind of an interesting, I didn't appreciate it, but this NSERC promo science, and because of the Indigenous tree planting piece, it really fit in. And because the city of Toronto gave them $100,000 matching, it was like almost a sure win. Because I've seen the proposal, I was thinking of putting something in myself, maybe next year. But NSERC does promote these kinds of things. And these were high school students who were doing the tree plants with the Indigenous community.
See, the name of the program actually in Anishinaabe, it means I think it was flooded valley healing because it's a quarry. Whenever Toronto has floods, just the entire area floods up. I think they said up to 2 meters and stuff. So they had some issues with trying to create flood adapted buildings and dealing with that. And one of someone from the city was saying that, if this had been revitalized earlier and we had naturalized it, then we perhaps wouldn't have seen so many detrimental effects from the flooding in that area.
You noticed I try not to pronounce it, Kit. Thank you. I can't speak it in the Anishinaabe language, so I tried to avoid that, but they did a very good job of it, many of my colleagues.
Well, thank you, Toronto. And that was the most fascinating account. I've been to the Brickworks, but had no concept of the governance associated with its development. Very fascinating. Benoit, can Halifax share screen, please?
Yes, you should be able to.
Good. Then we'll just do a screen share. And we'll do a next step. Come on. There we go.
Great. All right. So, hey, everyone. Today, Zoe and I will be discussing and sharing sort of a snapshot of what the Halifax team did today. For context, the topic within governance that we looked at was ownership of urban forests within the city. So, yeah, like I said, we were looking at land ownership in HRM. It was pretty interesting because we've spent the past 2 days with Crispin Wood, the superintendent of urban forestry, and Natalie, the supervisor of contracts. And we've explored canopy cover through the municipal lens and gotten their perspective. So it was interesting today to see a broader range of land ownership and land use types. Each stop, Peter encouraged us to question what obligation might each institution that we are at feel towards canopy cover on their properties. So some of the land ownership that we considered were municipal. In provincial, we went to some public schools and we went to a hospital. For federal land ownership, we went to a national historic site. For those of you who are familiar with Halifax, it was the Citadel Hill. We went to a military graveyard and base, and for private institutions, we went to an academic institution, which was Dalhousie in the city, churches, and private schools. So we did some driving around, some walking around, and we saw a lot of places that we'll share with you now.
So we looked at some cemeteries. The picture on the right is of the old burying grounds, which is the first cemetery in Halifax. And cemeteries are a good example of private institutional land that has a lot of opportunity for planting, both because of the land is, the soil is pretty rich because, bodies have been buried in it. And it's also going to be stable in the long term because these places these sites aren't going to be developed for hopefully a very long time. So that offers stability for the trees to grow very big. So these sites also, there's some constraints. Most of the graveyards in the city, there's a few that are owned by the city, but most of them are owned by various church organizations. And so they often face budgetary constraints, especially with the older graveyards. Most of the graveyards in the city no longer have active interment, so they don't have any income from the graveyard. So if people are looking to plant trees, the organizations, the owners of the graveyards, aren't necessarily going to put up any funding for that. Yeah, and another consideration that we discussed was that many of these sites are quite old, and all of the trees in them are quite old. And so there's a lot of opportunity to plant new young trees in there to hopefully increase the age class diversity in these stands. Yeah.
Yeah, and while we were at cemeteries, another thing that we were chatting about was what is the appropriate amount of use of recreation, or maybe not recreation is the right word, but of use from the public in these spaces, and what would that look like in terms of adding trees and who's using the space? So following that, we also went to schools, both public and private. Obviously, this public schools were provincially owned. Schools have a lot of green spaces and yards, or at least the ones that we visited, which offers a lot of opportunities for new plantings and ultimately increases in the canopy cover. These spaces could have a significant, or the trees at least could have significant provisionary services, such as shade for children playing in these schoolyards and green spaces. So the addition of new trees would be super beneficial in the schoolyards that we were seeing today. One issue that we were kind of pondering was children and vandalism. If children were playing in the area, there's always that risk of them ripping down branches or whatnot. So that's obviously a consideration with new plantings that are going in, especially juvenile trees that are particularly vulnerable to those sorts of stresses. However, on the other end, there's a lot of opportunities. Students, teachers, and parents can generally be fairly involved and stewards of the urban forest in their spaces. So yeah, there's the opportunity for volunteer plantings and whatnot. Difficulty is that municipal tree planting programs won't necessarily fund new plantings because they can't themselves protect or maintain the trees once they're planted on non-municipal land. So that's an interesting governance consideration of once these trees go in, who's managing them and who's maintaining them.
So we also went to Citadel Hill, which is a National Historic Site, federally owned and managed by Parks Canada. This site in particular, the entire hill is mostly lawn. That's 6 hectares of land with basically 0 forest canopy. So there's a lot of space that we could plant a lot of trees on. And historically, this hill would have been wooded, and then it was clear cut to build the military fort to have a clear view out to the harbor. And then the lawn was still, the hill was still used as pasture for cows. So its current use isn't necessarily historically accurate. And so there's an argument to be made that putting in trees would actually sort of improve its cultural and historical value for teaching. One major issue is conflicts with people wanting to recreate on the hill, and so potential pushback from the users of the park, because there's people come out to sit and watch the sunset or to have picnics a lot on the hill. So one possibility that we talked about is planting shorter trees, especially in areas that already don't have great viewscapes, because there's a side of the hill that you can look down at the harbor from. There's another side that you can watch the sunset from, but there's 2 other sides that don't have necessarily the nicest view. And we could definitely put trees in there. Yeah, so in order to sort of get trees to be planted there, this would likely have to involve collaboration between parties within Parks Canada as well as the general public would have to be significantly interested in planting trees for it to become a viable option.
All right, and the last land ownership type that we looked at were universities and academic institutions. So specifically, we visited Dalhousie University, Sexton, and Studley campuses. For those of you that aren't familiar with Halifax, they both fall on the Halifax Peninsula. Thought that we all shared when we were on the campus was that these institutions may feel a greater obligation to increase their canopy cover because they are viewed as, at times, agents of change. They're conducting often environmental research, especially at Dalhousie with the School of Resource and Environmental Studies. And yeah, they're seen as, at times, living laboratories for students to learn while they're on campus. An example of this that we saw was learning groves planted by the Stress School and by Peter with diverse native trees and pockets around the campus for Dalhousie's 200th anniversary. Academic institutions may have less stability than, let's say, cemeteries, as we were discussing, in terms of development. Universities may want to build new infrastructures, which poses a risk to tree populations on campuses. Additionally, there's a lot of traffic on campus, which could lead to vandalism and may cause a safety concern with declining trees and falling branches and whatnot. An opportunity is that students and professors may feel a responsibility towards their campus and could take on similar projects like that learning grove. And we saw a couple of those while we were walking around campus. So,
Oh yeah, so we had some questions. Mainly, so we wanted to think about how do the decisions about trees on those sites get made, and sort of which actors are involved, what are each actors and stakeholders' considerations, and how do we want to foster canopy cover growth on institutional land when those institutions don't answer to the public in the same way that municipalities do, that they have to listen to their constituents.
And
Yeah.
just quickly, some concluding thoughts that we had where non-municipality owned institutional land in HRM is significant. There's often good planting sites and trees could be successful there. In terms of increasing canopy cover, it's important to consider the long-term stability of these sites and whether development will be taking place. And a lot of canopy cover on these institutional lands that we saw today is dependent on personal preferences of the people in charge in these institutions and the persuasive power of the actors involved in making these decisions. Awesome, that's all from us.
Thank you, Halifax. That's
Thank you
good.
very much. We have any questions for the Halifax folks?
Oh yeah, stop sharing. Stop. There we are. No challenges from Camilo? He knows all about these ecosystems.
I mean, I would just say these are obvious, it's good that you point out and, these are obvious places where you could put more trees in, most of them. But the challenges are because you're dealing with different institutions. And as you pointed out, it's about the individuals there, right? Like if they don't want them, then, or they don't see the value of them, or they don't want to maintain them, the cost of them, then it's not going to happen. So, I mean, I would just say in Toronto, we started even before EAB, we have all the public school system trees inventoried on all the schools, the 500, I think it's actually over 600 schools now, high schools and primary schools. And it was actually started before EAB arrived, but of course, all the schools had a lot of EAB. In fact, they were one of the big losses was on the school systems of the ash trees for EAB. But because there was the focus on children and sunshine, like too much UV radiation, et cetera, there was a real incentive within the school board itself to come and try and replace them. And of course, engage the students in the process. So, I mean, I I guess I'm not, this isn't a question, it's just like, these are real opportunities, but it's finding the right bodies in there. And it's not usually the top down. I'm going back to my model of top down. It's not usually that, it's one teacher or one principal who's willing to take it on and inspire their school, and they have to stay with it. So that's been the problem, because they ran into a lot of issues with unions and the people who look after the buildings, the grounds people, and that's true at universities too. I mean, we've inventoried and we've tried to get more involved in the management of trees on the University of Toronto, certainly the downtown campus. I can't speak about the outside, east and west, but it's really run by grounds, and grounds just doesn't see really our role. And of course, the first day, that's why I took people the first day. I knew that was the time for us to see the campus. And anyone from the Toronto group can comment on the perspective of trees on the front campus. Like it kind of looked like the open pit brickworks about 50 to 70 years ago. So anyway, it's finding the right people to understand the values, because even with our inventory and iTree, we tried to speak both. The schools were more receptive, the public schools, but the university was very much about, and we tried to talk about the carbon sequestration. They want to talk about how much they're doing for climate change, yet it seemed to be lost because we didn't have the right voice, and they still just hire commercial companies, tree care companies, to deal with their trees when they could have so much more. So I'm degenerating into a lament. And so I would just say, yeah, great opportunities. How do we make it better?
Sandy, when you started speaking about find the right bodies, I thought you meant that in cemeteries, we have such great sites. That 2-hectare cemetery, that was the first one in Halifax, has estimated 12,000 bodies buried there. So it's hard to find a better site when your normal soils are acidic. I think these will have an element of basic cations that will support tree growth. But speaking of the right persons, many of these kinds of projects, if they become a project rather than a program, and are complicated and require a lot of collaboration, really need what we call a champion. A single individual who's got a vision and is willing and able to put in incredible amount of time and energy over a long period of time to see things through. And usually if you encounter a successful long-term project, there will be 1 or 2 individuals that you can name who were the key ringers in making it all happen. Thankfully, we have those kinds of people now and then.
Yeah, that's that bottom up, Peter. Like the bottom up doesn't have to be a lot of people. It can be one, but if you have the right one.
Yeah, and I wanted to actually give an example. Thank you, Toronto, and thank you, Halifax, for your good example. But an example of what happened at UQAM in the science complex 15 years ago, when the university wanted to build a science complex there, they decided to destroy, to remove a parking, which was okay. But in the middle of a parking was a scrappy old poplar. And one student wrote to the president, said that this will be terrible if the university cut a tree to build a building. So they contacted my colleague and I, the president contacted my colleague and I. We went to see the tree. The tree was terrible. But we said to the president that maybe what we could do was to promise to plant at least 300 trees on the campus to replace this beautiful tree, which the president did. And today we have a campus, a science campus in downtown Montreal with lots of trees. And this is thanks to a student who complained to the president. So there is, when we talk about bottom up and power of some individuals, I think it's a good example.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Françoise, you also wanted to add something earlier?
I had a question for the Halifax crew. Since you've been teaching us all about asset reputation and how city officials are, subjected to all kinds of pressures that private landowners or institutional landowners might not be subjected to, unless somebody talked to you about asset reputation today as well. And we were talking about old and aging trees. It seems like some of these institutional grounds where, or maybe cemeteries might be a good place where maybe a greater age diversity of trees might be kept or diversified. I don't know. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, we definitely discussed that today, and the potentials for creating a diverse stand of ages, at least within cemeteries, especially with Halifax's climate of winds and hurricanes and storms and whatnot. And there's a lot of old trees there that could be coming down in the near future. And yeah, it just seemed like the perfect opportunity to be putting in juvenile trees that will potentially grow to the size of the trees that we have there right now.
Generally speaking, the cemetery owners and managers are not allowing deadwood to accumulate in the cemeteries. Cemeteries are seen not to be wild places, but rather to be well-kept places, even if some of the stones are laying down on the ground and there's seem to be not so much maintenance of the stones in some cemeteries. But if there's a storm and it knocks material down, they clean that up right away, because most of the cemeteries have mowed grass and you can't mow over deadwood. But if there is deadwood up in the trees, they generally get after that pretty quickly because of liability issues. People are walking around in these cemeteries and they don't want to be liable for falling dead material. And the cemetery needs to, at least in some respect, look good. But this issue of declining growing stock with no replacement in some cemeteries is quite disconcerting for, we tree fanatics. Thanks for the question. I think we need to move along so that we're going to make our 5 o'clock or deadline. And so Vancouver, are you ready to pitch in?
Yep. Hello. Let me see. We're sharing from like Google Slides today, so let me see if I can figure it out. Okay.
Seems to be working.
All right. Okay, cool. All right. Hello, everyone. So today, as we've discussed, we're going to be talking a bit about governance. We're going to share a few different examples of the ways that we see urban forest governance in Vancouver, and then a few quick little examples from Germany as well. So let's see. This is my first slide. Oh, okay. Sorry. I was like, this is wrong. All right. So just a reminder so this is pulled from the Urban Forest Strategy from 2018. So the city talked a bit about how canopy cover is distributed based off of different types of ownership. And they found that private land, there's the most amount of canopy on private land. And these are the neighborhoods that they found most of that canopy cover on, West Point Gray being the one with the highest canopy cover. And let's see. And then, so this is again a reminder of how canopy cover is distributed across the city. West Point Gray, like I said, is the one with the highest canopy cover and is right over here next to UBC. And so next, then Johanna is going to talk a bit about this neighborhood and how it's kind of close proximity to UBC determines how it's maintained. And then afterwards, I'm going to show you guys, again, pictures from where I live. This is like another area that has high canopy cover, but I'm actually going to show you a bit about the public streets. It has one of the highest canopy covers of public streets in Vancouver. And then Johanna will wrap it up with a few more examples of how urban forest governance is seen throughout these cities.
Okay, thanks, Caitlin. Yeah, just unfortunately, I didn't have the chance to take pictures in Point Grey at the moment, obviously. So you kind of have to trust me that this picture is like very representative of the whole area. And there's like a bunch of very old trees, and this is a very quiet and residential area with a lot of families. Then there's like this mansions close to the water, but up there, like up the hill, it's like more students or yeah, families. So there's like it's pretty much equal in like the street trees and the like trees on private land. So it's like generally an insanely green neighborhood. And one place that's my kind of my favorite place in all of Vancouver is Pacific Spirit Park. It actually wasn't on the map for counting the canopy cover in Vancouver. So this is a regional park, and I looked into that because I'm like obviously not very familiar with like the ownership rules. And this is maintained by Metro Vancouver, which is like a kind of like which includes several municipalities. And they are usually much bigger parks. And this one has the it's specifically like their specific contribution that they define for their parks, and it's to contribute to social cohesion, to education and research. Also some from UBC, because this is like right next to UBC, like this kind of part, like right next to the sea is UBC, and in between is Pacific Spirit Park, and then there's like the rest of the city of Vancouver. And yeah, for sure the ecological benefits. So I personally found that really interesting, that it's supposed to like help the social life of Vancouver and education and research. And yeah, it's just the most amazing park. I was trying to find a video that my roommate, who's a photographer, took, but yeah, I couldn't find it. It's just magical. So yeah, generally the regional parks, as a higher level of organizational form, they are working on higher connectivity between green spaces in this fast expanding city or like metro region. So how this is done on street level, Caitlin is going to show in more depth.
Yeah, so I'm going to bring us back over to the West End area and just kind of look at, so we're going to look at how residents show different types of care and kind of like their own form of governance on the streets. And again, this is where I live, but it's also situated between Stanley Park and downtown Vancouver. So it's definitely a very unique kind of neighborhood. And again, it has the highest canopy covers at the public street level. So whenever I'm walking around the neighborhood, there's tons of different really cool streets and just a lot of character, different buildings and stuff, trees. And I just love seeing like the different ways that residents kind of like either decorate their trees or like just show that they care in the community. So a few of these pictures are just going to be examples of that, just because it really like intrigues me how people kind of engage with nature and urban environments. So I just wanted to highlight that today. So these are birdhouses. I was trying to get a few of them. They're kind of high, so I had to kind of get a low point of view. But these are examples of, there's a row of trees, and it's funny because apparently they have their own social media, which I need to check out today. But yeah, so it's Birdhouse Row on Vancouver, right near Nelson Park. So again, I pass by these trees when I'm going downtown or to my bus. And it's just a really interesting way to see how residents are kind of like, you know, adding character to the trees in their neighborhood. And also kind of brings to light kind of what Sandy was saying, like, you know, this might be an example of kind of like the bottom up approach to engaging with nature. And then these trees in particular are right near like a dog park and a community garden. So it's just kind of interesting to see these kind of different types of governance, you know, both top down and bottom up kind of coexist next to each other, and maybe how they influence one another. And then this is another example, but this time, this is more of a top-down example. These look like, and I looked into the program a little bit, called Green Streets Program through the city. And I reached out to them because I'd love to see if they have like a map of where these are dispersed throughout the city. But it looks like they're kind of different pockets of, you know, where it'd normally just be like either grass, or you know how in the city sometimes the grass turns into like muddy, like dirt near the streets. So there are areas that, you might not be able to grow a tree, but you can plant a garden. And so the city, it's done through the city, and they kind of put up these little areas, and I think they plant some of the tree or some of the plants to get them started, and then people can kind of sponsor these areas. But again, kind of just a neat way to see how community residents are engaging with green spaces. And then, is this going forward? Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, we
there
went
go.
all the way back. Okay. Sorry, I'm working with Google Slides, not used to it. And then my last example, another reason why I really I like my neighborhood that I live in is that they have a lot of kind of like pedestrian only areas. So this is an area near that commercial district I was showing you guys yesterday that had no green space. You just kind of turn a corner and it's this pedestrian only area. It's always really popular. There's kind of different retail shops, restaurants on the side, and it's always just a nice place that people can kind of gather. And then also on the right, just other kind of places, pocket parks and pedestrian places. So just a nice, a different way to kind of engage with people and kind of bring them together with urban forestry as kind of the background context. So, and now I'm going to hand it back over to Johanna.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, I hope this is not giving like whiplash or anything. But yeah, for the last two slides, we were kind of looking at different sites. Like I picked two different sites that I kind of compared between Germany and Vancouver, which I like, but now I'm in Vancouver, which I know is not, it's not an accurate comparison at all. And also it kind of like, in this case, made my city look good, but it was just things that impressed me. And I don't see how Halifax, you managed to see that many sites, because there were so many I wanted to look at. But yeah, I just picked two. So the first one's going to be the cemeteries, which I found really interesting. And I know that Jess did some research on it. I'm really like curious to hear more, like once she gets to Vancouver. And yeah, so in the upper corner, you can see the one that's in Steinfurt, which is like a small village part of Bad Nauheim, but it's very representative of what great like cemeteries look like here. There's like a lot of old trees, and it's kind of like, for me, it's what belongs to a cemetery. And I know that they're also doing more like the kind of like forest cemeteries, where you're like basically buried underneath a tree, and you just kind of like, your family knows which tree you're under, and that's that. And then there's like the Mountain View Cemetery in Vancouver, which obviously, like, unfortunately I couldn't take an actual picture because the view is amazing, but the place as such is, I don't know, I went for a run like a few weeks back close to this area, and I consciously decided to like not go close to it, because there's like so much sun just burning onto it, and there's like this like huge open space, and there's a lot of like paths around. And I know you talked about it before, how much, like, obviously I shouldn't be like running around the graveyard, but like at least like go close to it, because it's actually like a huge park. And I don't know, I kind of know it, that cemeteries are kind of part of the like life of a city, obviously a slower kind of life, but I know, I just feel like it might be a little bit of a different understanding of them. And I was honestly shocked at like the fact that there's apparently only one cemetery in Vancouver, which I don't understand, but also that it looks so different, and that I would not feel motivated as an old person in particular, because that's like usually the main people going to a cemetery, I would say, to go there and to like spend some time there, because I know that for many people that is really important. And I don't know enough about this kind of like culture and the whole background to it, but that's just like one side that I was very surprised about, the difference between Vancouver and my hometown. And I know that's everywhere in Germany. I went to a cemetery in Berlin, which is the capital, and it's also, you don't really recognize walking into it. It's just in the middle of a forest, and yeah, I don't know, it was just very like striking to me. So yeah, the second, I know that there's like, as you said, there's like maintenance questions, and also probably like safety, the feeling of safety. But I just like, I know that it's possible to like keep it a little bit more like wild. And yeah, as I say, I know from like personal examples that it can be very important to people to see it more. Yeah, it's kind of like an important thing of like being there, and also seeing kind of life go by. Like if the tree is dead, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because you're part of life. I don't know, I'm getting very philosophical in a way, but I know that it's important for some people, and I feel that, yeah, that's just kind of like the thing that I think about a lot, how people feel in a place. Okay, you can switch to the next one, Caitlin, thank you. And then lastly, this is like quite so many pictures. So the upper row is both Vancouver, and the lower row is both my town. So these are rehabilitation facilities, mostly for people with like suffering from heart condition, or like a stroke, or any kind of cardiac disease. And it was just a coincidence that for a different study, I went to this like upper side, which is the GF Strong rehab facility. And it does look nice too, because I can't take actual pictures right now, but it is, it's just like the trees are just in the corner, and those people can walk, and they're supposed to walk because they are like in rehab, and they have to kind of like get back to life. But the only green space next to it is actually a sports field. And I find it super like inconvenient and not very fitting for them. And obviously my town on the other side, it's literally built for rehabilitation. And the whole purpose of it is that, so the clinic is like in the midst of the park. And obviously there's like more trees planted on the clinic grounds too, but it's also, it's just different what kind of priorities cities have. And obviously I decided to like not live in the city that's like prioritized on elderly people, which is really a problem, because when I grew up, you were not allowed to sit on the grass in the park. You were not allowed to like ride a bike around anywhere. So yeah, I'm kind of traumatized from like stepping on grass ever since, and I'm just like getting back used to it in Vancouver. It was just very striking to me to see the difference in prioritizing. Yeah, even these like more private, I don't know what that's called, like it's kind of a public owner, but it's not owned by the municipality. But those kind of like clinic complexes and what the priority in like green space and connecting it to green spaces can be. And I found that very interesting. And obviously it's only one example that I picked and not representative. That's it. Thank you. Any questions?
And that's what we got. So let us know if you have any questions.
Thanks a lot, Caitlin and Joanna, and I hope your traumatization of walking on
I'm
grass.
recovering.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
recovered quickly for
I was
that.
gonna say that's harsh. And
I
walking on
know.
grass.
Yeah, that's why I love Vancouver so much.
Does anyone else have questions for Anik? Go ahead.
I just want to say I put a link in the chat that there's a new section in the big cemetery called Cimetière Côte des Neiges in Montreal, which is a very
Nice.
tall cemetery. And there's an option now that you can bury the ashes under a young tree that they plant.
Yeah, that's very similar to what we have. Yeah, and I know a lot of people that are very much in favor of that. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Anik.
And if the tree dies, they replace it. So
I don't really have questions that I can think of right at the moment. I just, again, I guess it's from Toronto. I mean, as our faculty, we have our forest conservation students. They have done urban forest management plans for Sunnybrook Hospital. Similarly to what you're describing, you know, health recovery, they have a large, it's a hospital that sits on a ravine. So there was a lot of interest and incentive for healthy, it was for veterans. It's a famous hospital for the veterans, as well as just more a broad hospital. I don't think they've done anything with the plan. They were very excited about it, and the president of the hospital, you know, trumped it up, but I think it died because there was no one inside. Again, that person or group that was willing to go after it. We've also done urban forest management plans for the large commercial owner of our Mount Pleasant Cemetery, the Mount Pleasant Cemetery Group, I think it is. It's a private enterprise. It's a profit-oriented enterprise with the 5 big cemeteries in the city of Toronto. And we've done management plans for all their cemeteries, forest management plans, because we were invited by, they had a forester who actually invited us in. And so the trees in those larger cemeteries, the older ones, the Necropolis and Mount Pleasant, they're actually used as dendrology, like they're actually an arboretum, and they're used very much. It encourages people to walk through. And while the forester was there, the forester is no longer there. And I have not heard anything in the last 2 or 3 years. He finally retired. And my guess is that the commercial venue, that is the company that owns it, wasn't interested in doing anything more than manicuring. Like, it's very much a manicured, but they have large old trees there. And there's great potential if you can find somebody to get engaged. So it's not really a question to you guys, but it's just sort of getting society to see the value. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
We actually,
We'll
sorry.
get there. I'm optimistic we'll get
Mhm.
there. You just keep
Yeah.
hammering at the door saying, look, you could do this.
we actually did sorry, I'm going to be fast. We actually did have like a smart natural asset group this summer, and we had a workshop with stakeholders from the city, and we were mostly like inviting people from different municipalities, but we also had some like people from Vancouver Coastal Health or from the hospital coming there. So that might actually be like a way of like engaging this. I mean, nothing has come from it yet, but it was only this summer, like a few weeks ago. But I was very excited to see them because I think it's a huge like chance, and it's quite the gap. So yeah, that's definitely the question: how to engage the people.
More of us talking to them and bringing them in and showing them what's possible. I think some people just haven't really thought about it. And then once they do get inspired, the narrative, Camillo, back, you know, the narrative starts circulating. But then, of course, I was going to say the top down, whoever the top, even in these private sector, there's a top down, they start counting money. And they want to know, you know, how much is it going to cost to maintain? You know, maybe even if they get planted with partnership programs, they're going to cost to maintain, and what's the bottom line? And even like, I don't know about other cemeteries, but here they're commercial enterprises. So, you know, sometimes they're associated, the big ones are commercial, sometimes they're associated with churches, and that's very different. We tried to work with one of the churches, and they have an old way of coming at it. So it's a real challenge. I'd say bottom up, though, it's finding someone in the congregation or someone in the company to sort of get their ear and start telling them stories, these narratives.
Okay, thank you, Sandy. It's time
Sorry.
for
I
us
was
to-
gonna say Peter must be looking at his watch and
Yeah, he is.
Oh,
I
yeah,
know.
Montreal.
I know.
Okay, Montreal,
Thanks,
we're not
everyone.
gonna cut you short, Montreal, but do please try to observe the 10 minutes.
So who has the honor in Montreal today?
I won't say
can't be-
anything to Montreal.
Yeah, it can't be Christian because he's otherwise thinking about other things, I think.
He's there on his phone.
I know.
Do you see my screen?
I am there, Peter, and I don't think about the other thing for now.
Do you see my screen now? Okay. So yeah, we will present you what we did this morning in Montreal, and the morning.
Bastien, you're not loud enough.
Yeah,
Okay.
try to speak a bit louder, Bastien.
Yeah, sorry. I will. Okay, so yeah, the morning didn't start really well because most of us were stuck in the traffic. So we get really late at the first appointment. So we didn't have so much time to discuss with people from the Sauverdy. I will present them after, but then we moved to meet the urban forester of Montreal to visit a park and talk about managing your natural city parks. And finally, we realized that Christian's car was stolen, so we were kind of mixed emotion today. So yeah, that's it. So I will start to present you the Sauverdy. So Sauverdy means in French, it's a contraction of Société de Verdissement, which means the Greening Society. And they are a non-profit organization founded in 1982. But they got really big in 2012 when they were included into the Canopy Action Plan of the City of Montreal, which is called today the Climate Plan. And the objective of that plan is to plant 500,000 trees in 10 years. And among those trees, 300,000 will be planted in the public property and 200,000 in private and institutional properties. And this is where the Sauverdy is involved. So they are dedicated to plant the trees there. So their main objective is to plant 20,000 trees per year. So the main funding is provided by the City of Montreal, of course, so as a part of the climate plan, but also from private funding, which are much smaller. But the main, the most important things that those private, this collaboration with private institutions bring is the networking, and especially to find the fields where to plant the trees. It seems to be really challenging for such organization to find a place to plant the trees. So that's a very important point that this collaboration brings to them. The main challenges that they face is first to plant a diverse urban forest. So they use more than 200 different species. And interestingly, they got their own nursery. So they can have a lot of stuff and use it when they pick up what they need for a specific project. They also try to avoid tree mortality because they are planting really big trees. So they use the principle of planting the right tree at the right place. And they also implement very high standard in plantation practices. So basically they will do very big planting holes. They will water the trees every week for at least 1 year after the plantation and things like that. And finally, something really important for them is to convince and to communicate with those private institutions, which main objective is not often to plant trees, but rather to improve their image for the public. So they have to, yeah, most of the time they would like the trees to be small and on the side. So they try to communicate them that it's important to plant trees, many trees, big trees, and that's a big part of their main communication. So now I give you to David.
All right. For the next visit, we went to a nice.
I'm sorry, I forget to present you the site where we went. It's because we didn't have so much time to visit it, but it was a parking on the L'Oreal, like the makeup cosmetic company.
Shampoo.
So the idea is to plant 15% of canopy cover. So they planted 275 trees, and they didn't really know how many species, but they told us it was between 20 and 30. And what was nice with that project is that they removed impervious soil to plant the trees. So that's a good addition to reduce heat island. And finally, they, as you can see on the pictures, the site was close to a natural forest. So they considered that in the choice of species they did. So they didn't plant any species with invasive potential. So that's it for me. This time it's for David.
All right, so take two. So after that, we went to a city natural park where we met with a forest engineer from the city, and he make us walk through the Saragay Park, which is 96 hectares wide and was funded in 2008, and quite. It was one thing that was quite impressive was the species richness. Much of the park is composed of sugar maple and bitternut hickory as a secondary species, but it also contained many more rare species to observe in the city, such as black maple, which sometimes hybrid with sugar maples also. So some of the characteristic of the park is that the understory is very well developed, and it adds for some more structural complexity to the stands that are growing there, and this is contrasting with some other park within the city, such as the most popular one at the heart of the city, which is Montreal Park. And the goals there in this particular park is to conserve a late succession forest state and manage the problematic with the ash and mimicking natural dynamics with gaps and yet the white ash was before they made some intervention. It made for 5 to 10% of the composition. And some of the also the intervention they do and the inventories they made are for what kind of species habitat there is, and for birds and herpetofauna, and they also make some tree risk management within the pad. They make sure that there's no potential for injuries to the visitors, and they also intervened 2 times for controlling the invasion with the buckthorn, which was also quite invasive there. And also they do plant some quite a lot of different species among around 23 species and 20 shrub species, and there on that picture you can see that it was a much more open area. There was some white ash stands there that was vulnerable, so it's quite rare to observe that, but that site was subject to a clear cutting in 2019, and overall it's a similar management strategies than in some for natural forests in the region, but maybe more the most contrasting thing is that there's no constraint about the commercial consideration with the species choice they make for replanting and making the new forest there. And we also, as we went, we also saw some wetlands that were forming there, which were providing some habitats for some reptiles and different fauna species. And yeah, I think that's it. I think I'm sorry. I think I did I was supposed to leave the floor to my colleague here, but I just went through it. Sorry, Claire. But if I forgot anything, you can feel free to add.
Thank you, Montreal team.